exit, and we assemble across the road and await instructions from staff. Everyone needs to be aware that this is being live streamed. The video will be publicly available on YouTube, and a reminder to turn your phones onto either silent or off, please. Can I ask Shad to open with a karakia for us, please?
Kia ora Anne, tātou katoa, kia koutou i haramai I tēnei ata, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Rea kia noi tātou, I te atua nei mātou I huitahi nei I tēnei ata, ka tuku anō ranga whakamoemetinga whakawhetai ki a koe. Nō reira manakitia rā tātou I ngā hukutanga I ngā take e hora nei. Ka tuku anō ranga whakamoemeti, nō reira I te atua, tau mai rātou manakitanga ki rungi a mātou. I roto I te ingoa tautama I hukarati. Āmeni.
Thank you very much. No apology. Well, no. We got Stephen online? Not yet. But I'll send him Apology for lateness, yes. No one is booked in the public forum. We have no late items. We have no confidential business to be transferred into the open at this stage. There is no change. Well, there will be a slight change to the order of business. I'll go through that when we get to the item. We have no minutes. Any declarations of conflicts of interest? None. No deputations, presentations or petitions, and no recommendations from other committees. Do we have Stephen yet? Welcome, Stephen. So we've gone through all the machinations at the start of the meeting. We're now up to the business of the meeting, item 11.1, Egret Avenue, Tamutu Crescent land categorisation. And as the staff come up to talk us through this report, I just want to acknowledge the devastation to the lives of people that happened in that weekend. It's unimaginable that it is, must be, I'm just trying to think of the date, it's over 12 months?
14 months.
14 months now since that happened. It is a very slow process to work through, but I think we're delighted that we've been able to take part in the FOSL system that was developed by central government at the time, and that brings us here today to talk through the results of that. It is quite a restricted process with very strict criteria, mainly because I think central government didn't want it to be used as a precedent for what will be the results of climate change over the next half century. And we've got to continue to work our way through that. But we are looking at a specific area with some specific requirements and criteria. And the staff have done a lot of work. So, Phil, I'll hand over to you.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you, Anne, for those opening remarks. Definitely very pertinent. The night of 28th of January 2023, two landslides occurred above Egret Avenue in Mangatapu, which caused extensive damage to a number of properties. It's now been 14 months, as you've noted, since that event, and I'm here with Nick Swallow this morning to present our report seeking a decision on Council's participation in the future of severely affected locations, or FOSL, which is part of the Crown response to the 2023 North Island weather events. We certainly appreciate the impact of that event from 2023 and the incredibly difficult time that it has been for affected residents. Getting to this point has taken longer than any of us may have expected or would have wanted ideally. And we would like to acknowledge and thank the residents for their patience and the way that they've engaged with council staff and consultants throughout this process. I can also just acknowledge that we do have a number of the residents here this morning. They've been on a very long journey with us through this process, and they will no doubt be very interested in the decisions today. This has been an extraordinarily complex issue to work through as central government concentrated recovery efforts in the first instance on the three most heavily affected areas in Auckland, Hawke's Bay and Tairāwhiti. And as those regions continue working through their recovery, there's also been a number of other councils around the country, particularly in the North Island, who've been working through similar issues where their communities have been heavily impacted by flooding and landslides. Over the course of this response, there's been a significant number of staff across the organisation who've all been working to help our community. We'd like to acknowledge their efforts and to thank them for their input and contributions, which have been invaluable. There will be an ongoing recovery process as we move forward. The report being presented today is just another step in this process. Council's also had to engage a number of external contractors, consultants, advisors and expert guidance to assist our understanding and response to this event. Their efforts have also been greatly appreciated given the complexity of the issues involved. The report today sets out the background to the severe weather event, how FOSL was developed, the offer from central government to use FOSL in Tauranga, and how we might apply that process to properties affected by the slips above Egret Avenue. And part of that process will be to understand the impact and risk that applies to certain properties, and that will need to be discussed in a public excluded session because of the privacy and sensitivity to those owners. Before we move on, if I can just acknowledge my colleague Nick Swallow as well. He's been working very closely on this matter. His advice and support along the way has been much appreciated. Otherwise, if we can take the report as read, please, Madam Chairperson, and Nick and I are happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you both, but more importantly, as you say, thank you to the residents who have borne with this rather long and convoluted process that we've gone through. But I think hopefully today we start the beginning of the end of it for them. What I propose to do is to take recommendations A, B, D, E, F, G, H and I, which is the process part of what's before us today. So that's receiving the report, and I'm happy to move that. So we'll receive the report, we'll adopt the use of FOSL for the properties that we're talking about in Egret Ave and Tamutu Crescent. We will approve the resolution framework that's outlined in attachment 4, which is public. We'll approve the use of the Stormwater Reactive Reserve Fund to fund the share that council has to put into purchasing Category 3 properties. And we note that that is inconsistent with our policy, but we can by motion we can set aside our policy. But this is a one-off. We're not changing the policy. This is an exception to the policy. We're also instructing staff to progress an engineering brief for any remediation or mitigation options for those Taipari slips. And that might require further geotech investigation, so we're not discounting that. And final costing, of course. And then approving the purchase of any of the properties that are decided today in public excluded to be Category 3 properties, and to start the negotiations with the relevant property owners, and then delegating to the Chief Executive to manage that. And negotiating contracts with the Cyclone Recovery Unit for that co-funded acquisition of properties. Do you want to you happy to second that? Thank you. And just noting that our adoption of FOSL is, of course, a one-time only, as the central government has made very clear. And we're only doing this because the Crown is with us as a 50% partner. So that's A, B, D, E, F, G, H and I moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? Bill?
Just a clarification, Chair, to Phil or Nick, in terms of with the passing of the recommendations, and we've got to move then into public excluded, and the categorisation occurs, etc., what is the nature of the negotiations with the Cyclone Recovery Unit? It's not revisiting any of that. I presume it's just looking at the allocation of funding between the Crown proposition and TCC. I just wanted to get a bit of a sense of that part of the process.
Thank you, Bill. As the report notes, I think it's really critical to understand that FOSL is not a legislative or statutory process, so it's not set down anywhere where there is a defined process about how they work through this, what they require, what documentation is needed, if you like. They've been very clear all along that this is a locally led process with government support. And one of the key elements to that is this best of science approach, if you like. So we've gone through what we think is an extremely robust process with our consultants, Tonkin and Taylor. Jeff Farrell from Whakatane District Council providing some advice along the way through this process, and also peer review through Dr. Tim Davies. But part of that, because there's no set outline in terms of what has to be provided, we will just need to be able to show to the CRU that we've been through that best of science approach. We've had an assessment that meets the criteria that sets out that there are some properties that were residential properties significantly impacted by one of the 2023 weather events and which face that risk from a future weather event, and particularly an intolerable risk to life, which is their critical concern. So the principle underlying FOSL is that this is to help our community move on faster from the effects of those storms. But we will need to then be able to then conclude with the CRU the process, which includes the resolution framework, the methodology for how we'll conclude those agreements with the landowners around valuation for the property, for example, the details that we'll need to receive for the insurance and EQC settlements that they may have received or may be entitled to, and the timeframes that will be involved with that. So we just wanted to go through that process. There will be an agreement with CRU. They've contracted Crown Infrastructure Partners to assist through that. And there will be not only, I expect, a basis for assessing the information the first hand, but also an ongoing reporting basis for them to ensure that we purchase those properties accordingly.
So the categorisation process, the difference between, can you just go over, I think, for clarification, the difference between a category 2 and a category 3, please?
Okay, so starting with category 3. So category 3 properties are properties that will be eligible to participate in the voluntary buyout program. And that's something I'd really like to emphasise, that it is a voluntary buyout basis. So in this instance, council did not necessarily have to participate in this. As I say, it wasn't regulated that we had to participate in FOSL. And similarly, the residents aren't obliged to accept our offers if we, come to them with a decision that their property has category 3 and are offering to buy out their property. Essentially, there were those 3 main criteria that, as I mentioned before, so residential properties significantly impacted by a 2023 weather event, and which face that intolerable risk to life from a future weather event, and more particularly for Category 3 properties where that risk can't be suitably mitigated, to reduce that risk down to tolerable or low. So those are the key criteria for Category 3, essentially saying that those properties are too risky for people to remain living there in the event of a future weather event. For Category 2 properties, it's recognising that there is also some risk that remains with those properties in the event of a future weather event, but the understanding that that risk could be mitigated to be able to reduce that risk down. So either those residents have not been as impacted as much as others, and to that degree where we can reduce that risk down. So either through community level interventions or property level interventions. So community level interventions may be work that's done on council land, or it may be a wider piece of public work. So for example, in the Hawke's Bay where there was a lot of flooding, those works may have included works like stop banks or dredging the levels of the rivers, for example. With community level, it's where, property level interventions, say in Auckland, where they've been able to provide some grants to property owners to be able to do works on their particular properties as opposed to a wider benefit. As the report indicates, we've got a very limited number of properties that were affected by the storms here. Not to downplay the effects at all on the residents and the impact that it's had on them, but just in terms of sheer numbers, volumes and the monetary amounts, Auckland, Hawke's Bay and Tauranga have obviously been affected significantly more. And so the report proposes to retain just basically a Category 2 as an umbrella category rather than breaking that down into either the property level or community level interventions, or a third category, which is a Category 2A where further assessment would be needed. We think we can manage it between those categories 1, 2 and 3.
Thanks, Philip. So there could be some that are, so part of the motion today is an engineering brief for mitigation or remediation. Is there a possibility that that might not be able to be accomplished and we might have to come back and recategorise to 3s, some that we've categorised as 2s?
Early on in the process last year, Tonkin and Taylor provided to us a number of conceptual remediation options. Again, as the report notes, they are very high level. They are subject to final geotech investigation, detailed design, costing, and we're likely expecting there will be some consenting issues that will need to be managed with those as well. We think that based on our recommendations in terms of the properties which we think will be Category 3, that between the use of that land and between the council reserve, that there will be some manageable options to reduce the mitigation to Category 2 properties. We can't confirm that for sure, I guess, until those further assessment works are done. But at this stage, we would be hopeful that we won't have to come back and revisit this.
The door isn't closed if at the end of that process it isn't going to reduce that severe risk to life. The door isn't closed with FOSL.
Wouldn't expect so. I'll let Nick comment on that shortly on it, but ultimately the principle is to allow people to move on, and if there is that extremely high intolerable risk to life, then I would expect that would be something we would have to come back and revisit.
Thanks, Phil. And I would just note that, as the report indicates, FOSL was developed in response to the Hawke's Bay, Auckland and Tairāwhiti slips in particular. So it was very much a living policy. And I don't think, in all honesty, people have an answer to that question, Commissioner. It's potentially something that will need to be revisited across the country as things develop, because Category 2 is ultimately, a prediction that it will be able to be remediated and risk reduced through those works. So I expect if we have to cross that bridge, other councils will have crossed it before us as they get further into their remediation projects. But look, we don't know it at this exact point in time.
It's just making the point that it isn't the be all and end all. It isn't a flat finish. So just to be clear, the process would be, we'll go in public excluded, we'll talk about the properties and involved in the classification that's recommended for those. Then the staff will go and talk to the owners of those properties and talk them through that process. If they're category 3 and they agree to the buyout, then there's a process that would need to be agreed with them about the valuation of their property. Any insurances come off that first before the buyout happens. Is that right? So the ratepayers and the taxpayers pay the residual after agreed valuation, any insurance, and whatever's left, that's what the Crown and the council pick up.
Thank you. No, that is correct. So there will need to be that negotiation with the CRU, with the Crown, just to confirm that that's the expectation on the process as well. I think that picks up nicely on the previous comment that Nick made anyway, that they're already, well through this process with Auckland Hawke's Bay and Tairāwhiti, hoping that they'll have established, a well-established basis to conclude those negotiations with it. But yes, that's the expectation is that there will be an agreed basis for how we value those properties. We'll need to get some details in terms of their insurance and EQC. That will leave us with basically a net value for the property, and it's that net value which is expected to be shared between the Crown and Council.
Any other questions? Stephen, you all right? Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
Okay, so A, B, D, E, F, G, H, and I have been moved and seconded. I've gone through what that is. So I'm going to put that now. All those in favour say aye. Aye. You nodding or raising your hand? Carried. Thank you. So now we'll go into public excluded and talk about the different properties and the classifications, and then we'll come back into open and approve and go through C, J, K, and L. All right, so can I have a motion to go into public excluded? Moved, Bill, seconded, shared. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. So I have